I'm glad you are here and thank you for being here. I appreciate you giving up time on a Saturday morning to come and spend it with us. That is a wonderful thing. So, I want to talk about curves today. That's what we're going to be looking at and taking time with. The curves and sewing circles, all of that can be one of those blocks that can be intimidating, and the ones we tend to avoid because we're not sure of how it all works, or we haven't practiced enough and we're not all that good at it. So today I hope to take away a little bit of that fear and show you how easy these blocks can be. So again, welcome and glad that you are here. And I'm going to switch cameras because most of our work today is going to be um, on the table and on the sewing machine. And hello from Germany. Welcome again. So glad that you are here. Let me get to this camera. The block that tends to be the one that we think of the most when we're talking about curves is the Drunkard's Path. And today I cut my templates, or use the templates from Marty Michelle to cut my block. These are really nice, and one of the things that I really like about these is that both pieces are cut from this pie shape. The L shape is a little bit smaller than the inside pie shape on her template. And the other thing that's really nice is that in the booklet, she goes through and gives you directions and several patterns and everything to work with so that you can be successful using these templates. But the other thing is that all the instructions are right here on the template itself, which makes that really nice. And the reason that you don't have an L-shaped template is that you can cut on the outside of the curve, which helps on both pieces, which helps to make the cutting more accurate, because when you have to cut from the inside, sometimes the blade slips or whatever. So I like those templates, but I also use templates that come in magazines and books, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But let's look at what we need to do right here to get started making this block. The first thing is getting your sewing machine set and ready to go. One of the things that's important is to make sure you have needle down, because as we sew, we want that to stay in place as we make adjustments and stuff on that. The other thing I do is I will put my stitch length somewhere between 2.0 and 2.20, somewhere in there. I shorten that length, and the reason that I do that is because as you're going around the curves, that little bit tighter stitch will give me a little bit more control going around that. So I've got my sewing machine needle down, I've got a smaller stitch, so that all is going to be working well for me when we get to the sewing. So now the next is putting this block together. I need to first of all find the center of each of these pieces, and so I am going to simply just pinch a little in the center of each of my blocks so that I know where it is. And then I am going to match up that crease that I put in there for the center of that. Now, there's 3 different things that you can do to secure this. One is pins. That's what I generally use. But you can also do this glue, and this helps with accuracy too. And many like the glue. And what you would do is what you can, you see right here that this doesn't look like it's going to fit in there, and you're going to be able to sew it. That's because of the curve. This outside curve here is called a convex curve. If you look at it carefully, it looks like a half a football. And so that's the convex. This is the concave. This opening looks like going into a cave, and that's the way I remember that this is the concave. And sometimes when we have dramatic curves, we need to snip into the, to the concave curve so that it will lay flat and we can sew it a little bit easier. So if you were going to glue, do the glue method, you would put a little drop of glue right, there, and you would do that all the way down at the edge. And each time that you put a drop of glue, you're going to want to hit that with an iron, which I have right here. And you're going to, so that would hold it in place and it's dry and ready to go. But the other thing is I'm going to pin, and I generally use 3 pins. So I put one in the center, then I come to the outer edge. I line that edge up, and I will pin that just a little bit away from the edge so I can get started with my machine. And then I will go to this edge and do the same thing. So if you struggle a little bit with keeping that curve straight as you're sewing, then the glue might be the better choice for you, and that's very much an acceptable choice. The other one is that there are those who sew it without any pins, any glue. The thing about that, as you're sewing along, and I just want to show you how easily this fits into the pinning. You would start, get your piece going in the sewing machine. You would take a few stitches and very gently, no pulling involved. If you start to pull, then it's going to get off. And that will just fall right in there as you're moving along your machine. And as you can see, it stops and fits right in there. So I'm going to turn now to the sewing machine camera, and we're going to sew this. The other thing that I use is an orange stick. This is actually, it's used for doing your nails, and you can buy them in packages in the makeup department of the store. But I use these because for me, more than a stiletto, it grips the fabric, and I can do a little bit better job of holding on to that and keeping it flat. So I just kind of keep it right here in my hand, and I'm going to start that curve right there, holding that in place, getting that going. And then as I move along, I am just going to use my stiletto, and that way I'm really not pulling on anything. I am just taking that underneath piece and holding the top so that it's almost sewing a straight line. And key to something like this is to go slow. Just take your time and adjust as you go. I use the larger piece on the top. It just holds in, works a little bit better. Sometimes if you have a tight curve, you will start to get creases. If a crease happens either on the bottom or the top, and you can feel it from the bottom, if there's if you're getting a crease in any way, stop, lift your presser foot, and adjust. So now I'm working that bottom piece in there. I'm keeping this, and it really does make a difference with the wood of the orange stick. It just holds or grips the fabric a little bit nicer. And so I have different stilettos that I use for different things. And when I'm not on camera, I can usually go a little bit faster, but at the same time, it's good to go slow so that you make sure that you're getting everything sewn in exactly the way it's supposed to. That is not a bad thing. All right. So I use my little leaders and enders so that I don't get those bunches at the ends. All right. So now let me go back to the other camera and take a look at this. We have it sewn all the way around. This one is going to lay flat. We don't need to worry about snagging or snipping into the fabric to make that correct. I want to show you something about pressing. I have some examples here beyond this one. There's two ways to press. One is you can press going in so that the seam is laying flat this way, or you can press it going out. And I want to show you the differences between those two pressing techniques. Let me grab my ironing mat and my iron. All right. Here is one that I've done prior to. This one I have pressed going towards the outside. What happens when you do this, it almost looks like reverse applique. The circle part of this is inset. So I have pressed it going to the outside. And that's pretty much what it looks like. The outside, or this white piece of fabric, sits up higher. This one is sunk down just a little bit more. Then if you were to press with it going towards the outside, you're going to get where this looks like it's sitting up in almost an applique piece on top of this. So again, if you're pressing, this way, you're going to get that applique type look right around here, and it's really nice. And if you want your circles standing out more, or to be more effective, or to have that applique look, then you want to press in. If you want the other, where the applique or the circle is sitting down in, I did this one and I ironed it in both directions in hopes that you would be able on camera to see the difference. So this half I pressed out, this half I pressed in, so that you can kind of again see a little bit. This looks like it's sitting up and more of an applique. This one is depressed or in, which is kind of like reverse applique, if you will. So either way that you press them, and again, the one thing that you don't want to do is do this, make that spin and pull the iron. What happens when you do that is that it stretches the block and you lose the squareness of it. So you really want to come, if you're doing it this way, hit that seam line. If you're doing it this way, come in and press it so that the seam is there, and then simply set the iron down, because we're about pressing as opposed to ironing, really. So here is where I'm going to do that. I'm going to hit around the edge of that, just hitting the seam line, and that way then I can set the iron down and go to the top, and I can simply set the iron on that. And as you can see, I didn't lose any of my square at all. There is no rainbows. So again, simply press that down with that. All right, then once you have, sewed the curve, press that. There are so many variations and so many things that you can do with sewing curves. And no matter what type of curve that you're sewing, it all pretty much stays the same. I want to show you a different type of curve. I been working on some New York beauty blocks, which is curved piecing again. This one, instead of just the 2 pieces in the curve, this one actually has 4. So I cut my L shape, I cut a portion of the inside pie shape. I have the templates that came from Alex's paper piecing book. I've had this book for a while. She has an updated version. It's wonderful to get started with paper piecing, and we'll tackle that possibly at another point. But I made copies of the templates, and then I copied those onto freezer paper. The reason I like to copy onto freezer paper is because I can iron that freezer paper shiny side down onto my fabric and cut it out without the template moving. When I pin it, sometimes the edges will move or push, those kinds of things. So I like to put it onto freezer paper, iron it to my fabric, and then cut out the templates. So I wanted to show you the templates. And now I have the next piece that is going on. And again, I want to just walk you through that. I am going to find the center of this block that I have paper pieced. And so I'm going to make my crease. I'm going to find the center of this section, and this is a little bit tighter curve. So it's, going to be a little bit tighter in there. I am going to then pin. I will pin the edges of each of those and sew it in. Or again, using the glue, and I like this very much so, this seam-aligned glue from Acorn. And I know that they sell it in the Quilt Show shop. So, but if, it's something like this and it's a little bit tighter curve, the glue might be a good option for you to drop little drops of glue around the edges of that, or pin. Again, I like using 3 pins. There are those who use, 10 pins. But it's what's going to work best for you. When I overpin, I tend to get it becomes cumbersome when I'm trying to sew the piece. So I stick with 3 and use my orange stick. And just want to share with you again, if you were going to use another pin where this seam comes in there, I would probably drop the pin there to make sure that that doesn't flip on me, because I don't want that lump in my sewing. But just to show you again, when you pin that, it just lays in place, and when it goes under the machine, it's like you're sewing a straight seam. And again, just to say this, if you find that you get creases or wrinkles, like it'll fold back on you if you're not working with your hand on that. This one, I would have this to the top so I could keep those wrinkles out of it. But if they happen, stop, slow down, and sew that carefully. Raise your presser foot, needle down position, and go. But as you can see, it works really well. The other thing that can be helpful, the tighter the curve that you are working with, let me move that out of the way, is that start at the center and sew to the edge. Then go back, start at the center, and sew the other half. That can also work quite well for many. have done that, and I do that especially when the pieces start getting really tight. When I put this last piece in, that's a fairly small curve going around there. So I'll start up here and go down. But to be really honest with you, I mostly forget to do that. That's my option until I mess something up and then go back and say, yeah, I probably should have started at the center and gone to the outside edge on a small curve. So those are tips to make that really easy. But again, look at how that just lays in there, and a 1/4 inch, pressing seam, and that it's almost a straight seam when you put it under the machine. So keep that in mind for that. And I would sew it from this advantage so that I could watch those creases and make sure that, and I like having the larger piece on top that I can grab a hold of and hold on to it and sew slowly around that. So again, putting that in there. So New York Beauty is a great block to show our skills. Then I want to talk about Improv. I've got 2 squares here. Improv can be really fun and make for kind of an exciting quilt. And if you want to put some curves in it, the other thing that I use curves for is when I'm doing landscaping. Quilts, I will take the one piece or the first piece, I'll lay the top piece over it, and then I'll cut a gentle curve in. These I generally don't pin because I oversize or lengthen it, and then I'll cut it down to the size that I want it to be. So no pinning involved with that. But let me also show you a negative. So I've got 2 pieces or 2 squares larger than I want my final piece to be. And then I'm going to take this and let's just make a gentle curve and cut that here. Let's do another one here and make it a little bit different. All right, so now we have 2 blocks cut, and I'm going to remove this one and this one and this. So now I have a positive and negative block. So what I would do then is this gets folded like this. When I put this, and I'm going to start sewing, and I'll move the camera, I am going to be working with this little edge is going to be about 1/4 inch away, and my needle should fall right here in this divot. So let me change cameras. And this is going to go under there, and I need to adjust it because it's a little bit bigger than 1/4 inch. So I'm going to get started, and then I'm going to adjust that. Again, I'm sewing slowly, working my way down. And I don't know if you can see this or not, but I'm getting a wrinkle there. This one I think I can move with my stiletto, and I'm going slow, stitching a few stitches. And I can't tell you how much that just shortening the stitch length is very helpful going around these curves. And again, I should come out in that divot, and yay, today I did. It's always exciting when you can do that. All right, so I have, let me go back to the other camera. So now I have sewn that curve, and it's time to press it. And so I make that decision again, you know, which way that if I want that center piece to pop up higher, then I would press it this way. And this curve is a little bit deep, and I can tell that it wants some, you know, some relief. So I'm just going to snip a couple in there, and that just lays down a bit nicer. So if I want the red to be the one that kind of pops up, then I'm going to press it in. But if I decide that I want the lighter color because they're lighter to pop up, then I'll press it in the other direction and get that look. So again, I can have, you know, a curved block that's very improv, and I can have the negative on the other side, and I have 2 blocks done, and done pretty quickly. So there you have the basics for curved piecing. Then there's those blocks that get a little bit trickier, because this is the block that I made first, but this is the leftover, or when I cut this piece, this was left from my square. When I cut this piece, this was left from my square. What I do with those, instead of wasting them or whatever, I will again go back. I will find my center on both pieces. And this is just an idea, because I don't always know what to do with those. So I'm going to pin that in the center of this, or glue it, or just start sewing from the center. And I'm going to sew out, because these are not going to match. You're going to have, so I put that down, I work my way around. And I get to this point, and I have this much left over, but I will stop sewing right there. And when I, you know, get that sewed and open it up, I can trim that block down to whatever size that I want it to be, because it's not necessarily going to fit in there. And so I can almost make a secondary quilt that's a little bit smaller, or change up the pattern in some way. But again, you can see that all of that fits right in there, sews quite easily into that, and you can use up those separate pieces. And again, you know, there's lots of patterns out there. If you use Marty's templates, those work really well, and she always gives you at least 3-4 different ideas that you can use. And then I want to show you sewing curves using the full circle, and I want to talk about that, because, you know, this is also a, you know, fun. This is a center of a quilt. I think the quilt is called Dreamcatcher, and it's paper pieced. Each of these rings are individually made. So it's got 1, 2, 3 rings, and the center piece in here. So when you are working with a full circle and sewing curves, this one's in progress, because I haven't gotten the center done, and I haven't pressed it real well at this point in time. So you're going to find this, you know, your center point on each of the circles. So if I have this circle done, actually I started in the center, and I found my half points on both sides. So I found my point here, 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 and here. So I folded it in half, and I folded it in half, found my center, did the same thing with this circle, pinned them at those 4 points, and then eased this in. Again, drop a pin, drop glue, sometimes with the full circle because you've got a little bit more fabric and things to work with. The glue could be really helpful on the edges. But again, if you're going to put the glue on, put it at the edge where you're not sewing, outside of your 1/4 inch seam, and hit it with an iron so that it stays permanent, because so that the glue dries quickly. So then these two are sewn together, fold in half, find the center point, fold this way, find the center point, and when this circle is complete, you would find the center point on it. And again, these sew in very much the same way that the smaller ones, or the half circle, the Drunkard's Path, sews in. It looks intimidating, but it's really not much different than sewing the Drunkard's Path and getting that to to fall into place and fit in, because basically this is 1/4 of a circle that you're sewing, and instead of stopping there, you sew your other 1/4 circle, the other one here, and this one up here. So don't let it intimidate you. It's a challenge, absolutely. And the more you do it, the better you get. But the key is, for me, is going back to the basics. You correct any seam allowance issues that you have. Making sure that you're sewing a 1/4 inch. You adjust your stitch length. I go between 2.0 and 2.20, somewhere in there, whatever works, because that shorter stitch length gives me more control as I go around the curves. Pin if you need to, glue if you need to, or if it works better for you not to. So then, but again, don't pull. If you're not pinning and you're not gluing, don't pull on that. Just ease it in. And again, the orange stick, for whatever reason, the wood on the orange stick, as I'm going through those curves and holding it, it just seems to grip the fabric a little nicer for me. I don't know why. Maybe it's in my head, who knows. And then when you press, try not to move that arm and push it to the side, because you're going to distort your block in the long term, and you don't want to do that either. So press down, and again, if you, whichever one you want to have pop out, then press it so that it's either like a reverse applique, or it's like regular, hand applique that looks like a really nice hand applique. What I chose to do on this one, because the black was so strong, I made this pop out as though it was appliqued on top of this, and I made this outside block pop up, and this one is kind of sunk in there, and it seemed to give more attention to the color on the outsides than it did to the black and white, because they're strong enough to hold it up. So that was just another little tip there for you. So hopefully that has helped you see that it doesn't have to be overly intimidating to sew circles. So half circles, Drunkard's Path, Improv curves. Enjoy them, and just go and practice and play a little bit today with some scraps and cut some curves and see how it works for you. And this is the week coming up before Christmas, and may your holidays be wonderful, and enjoy whatever time that you can with your family, and relax and do something that makes you happy and brings you joy. So blessings to you all, and I will see you on January 2nd. So goodbye and have a good week.